Okay, so you're saying instead of like our usual stack of articles and research for this deep dive, you got what, a novel?
An excerpt.
An excerpt, okay. But still,
It's a head scratcher for sure.
that's one way to put it. It's
Yeah.
page after page of the same sentence.
All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. Yeah.
Exactly. Which honestly is a little creepy.
It's definitely not your typical literary masterpiece, that's for sure.
It's like, imagine opening a birthday card. And instead of a nice message, it's just that sentence over and over again.
Well, it's more like, imagine that, but the birthday card is like 100 pages long.
Okay, yeah, that's a much better, way creepier picture. I'll give you that.
Right. It's like, what's the angle here?
Yeah, exactly. Like, is there even supposed to be an angle? Is this some kind of joke? Because I got to say, the punchline is starting to feel a little ominous, you know?
Well, the thing is, repetition can be a literary tool.
Right, like to emphasize a point.
Exactly.
Or to show like a character's state of mind.
Right. Think of like Edgar Allan Poe, even some Stephen King. They use repetition to build suspense, create this atmosphere of dread.
Okay, yeah, I get that. But this is different, right?
Oh, absolutely. The sheer volume of it, it's like the author is trying to burrow into our brains with this one single phrase.
Right. Like they're trying to hypnotize us or something.
In a way, yeah. And that's where the real intrigue comes in, because it's not just the repetition itself, it's the phrase they're using.
All work and no play.
Exactly. I
Yeah.
mean, we've all heard that saying a million times.
Oh, yeah. It's like practically drilled into us from childhood.
Right. Like a warning almost. Don't forget to have fun or you'll end up like Jack.
And nobody wants to be dull Jack.
Yeah, precisely. And so to see this seemingly harmless phrase repeated endlessly, it takes on a whole new meaning, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. It's like that unsettling feeling you get when the lights flicker during a storm. Like you know something's not quite right, but you can't quite put your finger on it.
Exactly. And that's what makes this excerpt so fascinating, so unnerving. It's playing with our expectations, forcing us to confront this primal fear of monotony, of becoming dull ourselves.
Where do we even begin to unpack this? If this were a detective novel and the only clue at the crime scene was this repeated phrase, what's our next move?
Well, a good detective would look for anything out of the ordinary.
Right, like patterns or inconsistencies or something.
Exactly. Who wrote this? Why? What does Jack represent?
Is there even a real Jack we should be looking for?
See, those are the questions we need to be asking, because somewhere within this repetition, within this seemingly mundane phrase, there's a story waiting to be unraveled. We just have to know where to look.
So this repetition, this epizeusis, it's like designed to unsettle us, right?
But the question is, how does it actually achieve that? Is it just the repetition itself? Or is there something more going on here?
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering. Like, why does this feel so weird?
Well, think about the phrase itself for a second.
All work and no play.
Right. It's practically a societal warning, isn't it?
Like, don't forget to have fun.
Exactly. We're conditioned from a young age to understand the importance of balance.
To let loose a little.
Right. Because if we don't, well, we all know what happens.
We become dull, Jack.
Precisely. And I think that's what the author is tapping into here.
Yeah. That fear of becoming dull.
Exactly. By repeating this phrase ad nauseum, they're taking that ingrained fear, that anxiety about monotony, and they're amplifying it, you know?
Oh, I see. Like they're turning up the volume on something that's already kind of unsettling to begin with.
Exactly. It's like holding a magnifying glass up to a tiny seed of worry and watching it grow into this monstrous shadow.
Okay. Yeah, that's a pretty intense image, but I get it.
And the way they do it, too, it's so minimalist. Right?
Yeah, it's just that one sentence over and over again.
No descriptions, no characters, just this stark, relentless repetition.
It's like the literary equivalent of staring at a blank wall.
In a way, yeah. And yet, it's anything BTT boring, isn't it?
Definitely not. It's like weirdly captivating, like I almost don't want to look away, even though it's kind of freaking me out.
Right, and that's the genius of it.
So we've talked about the repetition, this epizeusis, and how unsettling it is.
And how it might play on that fear of monotony, of routine, right?
Exactly. But I'm curious, knowing you, always connecting the dots, where does this exploration take us next, T?
It makes me think about the power dynamic here.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, we've got the author, right, intentionally using this repetition to get a reaction out of us, the readers.
It's like they're in control and we're just along for the ride, even though it's kind of a creepy ride.
It's a form of control, absolutely. And it's interesting because even though it's frustrating, we're still engaged. right?
Yeah, it's like, I want to figure this out, even though a part of me is like, just give me a normal sentence for once.
Exactly. So it's like the author saying, I dare you to look away. I dare you to not be affected by this.
It's like being stuck in the world's most boring meeting, and you can't escape.
Right. But here's the thing. Even though we might want to, we don't actually want to look away, do we? Because there's this nagging feeling that we're missing something.
Like, there's got to be a reason for this madness.
Exactly. And that kind of brings us back to our initial point about this being so unconventional, so different from anything we're used to seeing in literature.
So what's the takeaway here?
Yeah.
What do we do with this feeling of unease, this sense that we're being controlled by the author?
Well, maybe I asked the takeaway. Maybe the point isn't to find a concrete answer, but rather to sit with that discomfort, to examine why it makes us so uncomfortable.
That's a really interesting thought. So it's not about deciphering a secret message or anything.
Not necessarily. Maybe it's about recognizing the power that art has to make us feel, to challenge us, even when we don't fully understand it. And to your point about the meeting, what if this excerpt is a reflection of modern life?
Oh, wow. I like that. Okay, so like the repetition, the monotony, that's like the daily grind, right?
Exactly. The constant pressure to be productive, the fear of being seen as dull if we're not constantly working, achieving, consuming.
And that feeling of being trapped, of not being able to escape, that's definitely something I think a lot of people can relate to.
Absolutely. So while this excerpt might seem simple on the surface, it's actually incredibly complex in the way that it speaks to our deepest anxieties about work, play, and everything in between.
And that, everyone, is why we love a good deep dive. We started with a single, repeated sentence, and look where we ended up talking about the nature of art, the psychology of boredom, even the pressures of modern society.
It just goes to show sometimes the most unexpected journeys lead to the most profound discoveries.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Until next time, keep those curious minds churning.